business that is sold is very different from the business that is acquired, because the business that is acquired often has a huge debt.
David has had a remarkable journey from starting his own business brokerage to becoming an Amazon best-selling author. Get ready to be inspired by his wealth of knowledge and experience.
What would you say the best businesses are to get into? Which ones do you see the highest success with?
I always say that the best business for someone is the business that you can improve. So when businesses are sold, there's two ways to sell a business. You can sell the shares of a business, or you can sell the assets of a business.
How much money does a person have to buy a small business?
For Americans, I would say you need about 50% of what the seller's discretionary earnings is of the business. The greatest resource you have when you're going to buy a business is
Serene Desiree Podcast. David C. Barnett, so good to have you on the show.
Hey, Serene, I'm happy to be here. I always love an invitation to come and have a chat with someone about my favorite topic, which is business. And so lucky for me, I work in the business world, because otherwise it could be annoying for people.
Yeah. Oh, I don't work in the business world too much, and it is annoying for people. So you're right. So the reason why I had you come on was because I was looking into, flipping businesses, buying and selling businesses. And I just kept seeing your name recommended on Reddit. Like, people would go through the, how is Cody Sanchez's, I probably was looking up Cody Sanchez, how are her courses? And then people would always say, you need to look at David C. Barnett. And the thing about you is that you're not like the most famous guy on the internet, but you seem to be the one who's providing the most value and the most, you're looking at the numbers. You're telling the truth. You're not just doing the like success porn thing that everyone else seems to be doing. And I love that about you.
Whenever I get a comment on my YouTube channel where someone says, "I'm so glad I found your channel," my usual reply is, "Welcome to the smarter part of the internet." Because I'm a big fan of thought and consideration, and like, there's a lot of hype out there. There's no question, and there's a lot of people out there trying to get you excited about different ideas, things you've never considered before. And sometimes you just have to stop and say, why is someone wanting me to get so excited about something? And that usually they're trying to sell you something.
I don't necessarily have a problem with someone selling a course. It's what I have a problem with is if they sell me a course that isn't useful in my life.
So what attracted you to the idea
of buying a small business?
Yeah. You said you were looking up information on Reddit. You were trying to find out, information about different creators and stuff. What was the thing that kind of popped up for you that set you down that course of thought?
I'm interested in entrepreneurship in general. I have like a little video editing company. I have a few side hustles here and there. And I thought, well, buying, like, it's like what Warren Buffett does, he, like, on a much larger scale. I don't have Warren Buffett money, but it does seem like a logical pathway to buy a business that's already making money, that already has a source of revenue, an existing customer base, and it's done a lot of the hard work for you, and then you just buy it. I don't even think you should expect necessarily to make more money year over year. Like, just look at the numbers, and if they're doing well, then you buy it and you just have another source of income. You kind of buy yourself a job, especially for the first few years, I assume. But it seemed like a reasonable path to go on.
The reason why I was asking you is because your experience kind of mirrors what the pathway of the vast majority, and that is usually, number one, some sort of ambition or dream of business ownership, and then that's usually followed by an exploration or an attempt at starting a business, or like a side hustle, like you just described. And when people start to get a little taste for it, and they realize, there's a lot of stuff you don't control, right? You don't know if the customers are going to buy from you. Like, there's just all these unknowns. And then many people then graduate to this idea, well, hey, wait a minute. If there's a business out there that already has the customers and is already functioning and has employees that know what they're doing and all that kind of thing, I could buy that, and then I would avoid this problem of uncertainty around the customers and the sales and all that kind of thing. And so that's the normal progression. It usually starts with someone's interest in business. and then it evolves from there. And um, people do buy businesses to get into business with a lower risk. They eliminate the sales risk if they buy the right business. Um, but you can open yourself up to a whole other kind of risk if you don't do the deal correctly, and that would be finance risk. Over leveraging the business, having the money that you're going to pay for the business be repaid over a very short period of time, so you get burdened with high debt service costs, and then you could be in a position where if sales go down 5 or 10%, suddenly you can't afford to pay yourself.
Mm.
And that's almost the same kind of risk as that startup that can't make a sale. The difference is, in one scenario, you've signed your name to a big debt, perhaps, and in the startup scenario, maybe you put in some money to buy some stuff, but if you fail, your further losses may be quite limited, right?
Mm.
You've already invested the money that you had, and if it doesn't work, well, it doesn't work. And I know there's exceptions to that. People will sign like a lease for a storefront or something like that, and there could definitely be some liabilities that go beyond the failure of a business like that. But um, you can amp up the risk, in my opinion, much more with the purchase of a business than with most startups. And because people are always focused on the sales and revenue risk, they forget about the other stuff. And that's one of the things I try to do with my content is I try to educate people about all the risks and the pros and cons, and make sure that people get into business with a full understanding of what they're getting into.
It seems like the vast majority of businesses are not good buys.
Yes, that would be true. In fact, there are statistics that come out. BizBuySell, one of the biggest online websites for businesses for sale, does a quarterly report where they issue data and statistics. And the majority of businesses that get listed for sale don't sell.
Just to transition, so the audience is aware. I would like to make this podcast all about buying a business. So I want the intended audience for today is they're looking to buy a business just like I was, and they want the hard numbers. So this isn't like success porn. This isn't look how great you can do. Look how much money you can make. This is if you are looking for hard numbers and the traps that you to look out for and mitigating risk, this is the podcast for you today. So the first thing I wanted to get into was, why do you think buying businesses has taken such an upturn in popular culture recently?
It's demographics. So there is something that has been termed the silver tsunami, which refers to baby boomers having gray hair and retiring en masse. So this is predicated on a couple of assumptions. So the first assumption is that baby boomers who own businesses are going to retire at 65, which is the age that academics retire. So, they've been talking about this huge wave of boomer retirement for a long time. I am aware that a lot of baby boomers are getting old and a lot of baby boomers own businesses. The silver tsunami myth is something that I don't fully buy into, and I'll tell you my reasons why. Is number one, throughout my career, I've met people of all ages who come up with one of the 5 big motivations for wanting to sell a business. And those are burnout, boredom, and fatigue, divorce, poor health, the need to relocate, and retirement. And so older people, it's easier to see that they want to retire. But burnout, boredom, and fatigue happens to people in their 30s and 40s too. Divorce, poor health, all those things too. So there's always been sellers of all ages. Another part of this silver tsunami story is that because the boomer generation is such a large demographic generation, that somehow there's not enough buyers to take their place in the business world. So I was a business broker back in 2008 through the end of 2011. And in those years, for every good business I put up for sale, I could easily get 10 to 25 inquiries. So there has never been a shortage of people interested in a good business. It's really hard to sell a bad one, though. Like if it doesn't make money, Or if it's a good business that's been overpriced by double, those are hard to sell too, right? And so if it's a good business and it's been priced right and the seller has reasonable expectations and a buyer can buy that and make the numbers work for them, so they'll be able to provide for themselves, get a cash flow, get a return on their investment, service their debt, pay their taxes, all that stuff, then there's always been plenty of people willing to do that deal. And many of the people that I meet who own a business, when they go looking to sell, they often feel that their business is really great. People love their businesses. They've got a lot of emotional investment in their business. But the one thing that many of them don't really consider is they don't quite empathize with the buyers, which I find interesting because if you ask any business owner about their customers, you'll find out that they spend a great deal of time thinking about their customers, what their customer wants, what they would like. You know, in these inflationary days, I know lots of business owners that agonize over raising prices. They don't want to do it. They don't want to upset their customers, but all of their costs are going up. And at some point, they've got to raise their price too, right? And so they're thinking about their customer, how their customer is going to react. A lot of them have relationships, long-term friendships with some of the people they do business with. They don't want to upset them. But when it comes time to selling their business, they start to think about themselves. And so they get this idea that their business might be worth $1 million. In their head, what starts to happen is they start to buy the condo in Florida or the RV or whatever it is they want to do. And they're thinking about that. And for a lot of these sellers that I meet, when I see that they have sort of inflated expectations, I'll walk them through an experiment. I'll say, like, imagine you are the person who's going to buy this business and you're probably 20, 25 years younger. And, here we'll just estimate, like, here's the amount of money maybe you've saved up as a down payment. Then you're going to borrow some money from a bank, and here's what the payment will be. And I'll start to show them that from the cash flow of the business, that the numbers may not work. And what is fundamentally true about every one of these transactions almost is that the business that is sold is very different from the business that is acquired, because the business that is acquired often has a huge debt. And the sellers aren't paying those debts typically. Usually if they've been successful over the years, they've paid off their debts. And so they're enjoying a great deal of cash flow. That's what they see. They see their business being this great generator of cash. But in the hands of the buyer, a huge chunk of that cash is going to be headed to a bank. And so it makes things very, very different. And many sellers have a hard time understanding that for two reasons. But the biggest reason is that most small business sellers started their business. So they've never been through that process, which could lead some of them to not really think about it, from that point of view. But I think the other problem is that there's a whole industry of intermediaries out there who help people sell businesses, the business brokers. And a lot of their marketing is geared around, we can help you sell your business for the highest price. We can get you more money. We can sell it more quickly, whatever. And if it's a competitive market with several business brokers, then a business broker may have an incentive to lean into that inflated expectation in order to secure the listing, just to get the opportunity to have that business as part of their inventory. Just like a real estate agent might tell someone their house is worth more to try to secure the listing, and then later say, oh, I was wrong, we're going to have to lower it or whatever. So there's forces that feed into that extra large expectation that some sellers might have.
So let's say you're looking at a mid-30s client. They want to buy a business. Mm-hmm. So I guess your clients were mostly the sellers. They weren't the buyers.
When you're a business broker, you start by getting the seller, and they engage you to value the business and then get the documentation put together and prepare it and then advertise it on websites, right, to try to attract those buyers. Where I live, because the legislation in government licensing is quite old, business brokers are covered under the same rules as real estate agents. And so if I was going to deal with both parties, I had to enter into a dual agency capacity, which meant that I had fiduciary duties to both parties. And I took that very seriously. Number one, because if you're going to say to someone that you represent their interests, then you should. But number two, I live in a pretty small city. And so, you have to, if you're going to be successful at anything, build a reputation as being someone who's trustworthy and who's going to treat people well. In a big, large metropolis, that incentive may be not quite as strong. There's a never-ending supply of strangers to do business with sometimes, right? But I took it seriously, and what I would tell both parties is I would say, like, anything you say to me, I may end up repeating to the other party. Like, don't tell me anything you don't necessarily want the other party to know. But then I would launch into this huge thing about how buying a business is not really like buying or selling anything else. If done correctly, it should not be transactional, but rather collaborative for a bunch of reasons. You want to get into that one?
Absolutely.
Okay. So if you want to buy a bicycle and you find one on Facebook Marketplace, you go over to somebody's house, you see the bicycle, they want $100 for it or whatever. They might lie to you and say, "Oh, someone else is coming in 30 minutes. Hurry up and make up your mind." Right? You could say to them, you could lie to them too. You could say, "I'm really having a hard time with money. I've only got $80." Right? Neither of you has an incentive necessarily to be, straightforward, honest, transparent, etc. Because what's going to happen is at a certain moment, a price is going to be agreed upon. You'll pay for the bicycle, they'll hand it to you, and then you're done with that person. You don't have any more business with them, right? And so there's no knock-on effects or costs to your behavior being less than ethical if you told a lie, for example. In the world of business brokerage, buying and selling small businesses, there's a few things that make it very different. The first big one is that businesses are rarely ever sold on a cash basis, meaning that on closing day, when the deal is done, the seller usually does not receive all the money on that day. There's usually some amount of deferred compensation or consideration, whether it's something called an earnout, which is based on future performance, or something called a seller note, where the seller agrees to finance part of the buyer. So you're going to have payments over time. This gives the buyer a sense of security because those seller notes are often subject to offset in the case of material misrepresentations or undisclosed liens or something like that. It actually creates kind of a guarantee that what the seller told you during the sales process can be trusted, because if it turns out they lied to you, you have a recourse mechanism. So if it turns out that they lied to you about something important, and now you want restitution, well, you've got a mechanism to protect yourself because you haven't paid for the business fully yet. So you can offset your damages against that note if it's structured properly and it has that language in it. The other thing is that the buyer doesn't necessarily know fully how to run the business. So the seller has to stick around and run the business and gain a training and coaching relationship with that buyer. So and the seller, of course, has an incentive to make sure the buyer is successful in doing the training because the seller wants to collect all the money that's owed to them. So if they don't come together in a collaborative way and work together in an open and transparent fashion, they won't have the foundation for a solid working relationship in that transition period. And if at any time either party feels like they can't trust the other party, they won't go through with the deal, because the buyer might always be afraid, if this person doesn't support me through the transition, I'll lose my down payment and I'll lose the money I borrowed from the bank and I'll be screwed. The seller, if they don't trust the buyer, they're going to say, this guy is not going to run the business very well. And I'm supposed to collect payments over 5 years. What if he fails after 2? I don't want to have to come back here and try to clean up this mess. So both of them have a vested interest in choosing the right transaction partner and finding someone that they can work together with for that period of time. I almost say it's like a temporary partnership where both of them need each other to be successful. And to me, that's the correct way to structure these types of deals. You will find examples of it happening in a more transactional fashion, especially amongst the business types that have extreme demand. So a business type like that would be something like a gas station, a corner store, something where there's just so many buyers that people are willing to step forward and put down a cash amount to buy that business. And there's usually some other factors that drive that demand. Basically, any kind of business you have that can be operated by someone who has some kind of language limitation, it means that you're going to have more newcomers to the country are going to be in that particular category looking for those businesses. Um, and the other extreme example of the other way would be sort of a more professional practice where the reputation of the owner is kind of tied to the brand. If you think about like a famous architecture firm owned by an architect who's won a bunch of awards, why is the business successful? Is it the brand or that person, right? And so in a case like that, the buyer is probably going to want the seller to stick around sometimes for years so that that good feeling in the marketplace about that person rubs off onto the new owner. And that can take quite a long time.
Alex Hormozy talked about that a little bit. When he sold his business, he ended up putting the other guy, the buyer, in ads, like slowly introducing him in the ads, and then slowly transitioned so he wasn't in the ads anymore, but the audience still had a very positive image of this new buyer.
There was an extreme example of that. There was a documentary I saw once, I think, on one of the streaming services about Bert, the guy that started Bert's Bees. And his business had been sold several times over and is now in the hands of a multinational, but he's still under contract to go make a couple of PR appearances every year because he's Bert. He's the guy on the package. And that, I just thought that was amazing that was
Wow.
still happening. Yeah.
Guy can get a break. I'm sure he's being paid well.
I hope so.
So let's say you're a young person, you're in your 20s, in your 30s, and you want to buy a business.
Mm-hmm.
What are the first considerations you should make?
The first consideration you should make is taking a real objective analysis and inventory of your skills and experience. So what do you know how to do? And so people will sometimes get hung up on the industries that they've worked in. They'll say, "Oh, I've worked in the restaurant business, or I've worked in, warehousing or something like that," and they'll think that that pigeonholes them. But what you want to do is you want to look at what you've done in your roles. So, did you lead other people? Did you do customer service? Were you in charge of purchasing? Were you in sales? And you kind of make a list of these categories of areas that you have experience in that could be applicable and might help you in the business that you buy. At the same time, you want to figure out what sort of characteristics in a business are going to be attractive to you. I'll give you some ideas of what I'm talking about. So some people like to have businesses with a lot of big capital equipment, big machinery, stuff like that. It's worth a lot of money, and people sometimes feel a sense of security knowing that they bought a business that has these kinds of expensive assets. Other people don't feel that way at all, and they're perfectly comfortable with a business that might have intellectual property, like software or something. And so that there's not a lot of real tangible value. It's more about the customers and the cash flow and the services they provide. Some people really don't like to have accounts receivable. So businesses that sell to other businesses often have to invoice their customers and maybe wait 30, 45, or 60 days to get paid. If you don't want to do that, then you need to be in what's called a cash business, which is like McDonald's. When you go to order a meal, you pay right then. They don't finance you. They just sell you something and collect the money. And there's a whole range of businesses that fit that category. Some people like to have inventory. Other people really don't like to have inventory. They see it as an Achilles heel. If you don't have the right inventory, you won't satisfy the customers. If you buy the wrong inventory, you might end up having to liquidate or write it off. So there's all kinds of characteristics that businesses have. And so I encourage people that I'm working with to create a sort of pro con or yes no kind of list of these characteristics. The greatest resource you have when you're going to buy a business or you're going to go looking for one is not necessarily money, it's your time. There's a lot of opportunities out there to really waste your time. And so you want to have a very good idea of whether a business that you see actually fits your criteria. And so by having this list of of your own skills and strengths and the list of business characteristics you're looking for, when you see something for sale, it allows you to triage the situation really quickly. You can take a look at that business and say, is this matching sort of the criteria that I've set out for the business? And do I see where my skills are going to be applicable in here and help me to understand what's going on in this business? The when you buy a business, there's a seller there. The training and transition is to help you learn how to run it. Many people will kind of say, well, that means I can kind of buy anything because the seller can teach me how to run it. I I think that there's a real case to be made that you want to have some kind of knowledge uh, before you get into a business, and you can create some crutches for yourself too. But I wouldn't necessarily rely on the seller. So if you, for example, let's say you found a janitorial service company that you thought was interesting because it's a recurring revenue, their customers pay them every month. There's all kinds of great reasons why that's a nice business. You might want to go looking for someone maybe who retired after owning such a business for 30 years and pay that person to be on your team and help you look at the business. And that person could probably educate you very well as to, some of the other things you don't see when you look at that business, such as how hard it is to find staff willing to work overnight and, things like that, right? Like there's upsides and downsides to almost any business you can think of.
The costs would add up a little bit if you're looking through multiple businesses and hiring experts on each of these businesses. I would imagine that searching for the right business, if it takes a year, you could go through a dozen businesses that you're looking at before you buy.
Well, you measure out the investment by following a couple of rules. So for example, when you look at a business that's for sale, they're going to provide you with some information. It's called a business profile or a SIM in some cases. And you take that business profile and you make a conditional offer. You say, based on everything you have told me being true, this is what I'm willing to do as far as a deal. This is what I'm willing to pay you. Um, Most of those offers may not result in coming together for a deal. If your offer is accepted or you go back and forth and come to an accepted point, that's when you enter into what's called the due diligence phase. And that's when you can start to spend some money. And then ideally, you do it with a certain plan. You say, I'm going to do financial due diligence first and with the help of a CPA. Uh, and then if things work out in the financial due diligence, I'm going to start the legal due diligence and maybe the physical due diligence, where I'm going to get technicians, mechanics, et cetera, to look at major pieces of equipment that might be there. This would be the time when you'd be engaging more with an outside consultant. I recommend that people pick an industry. So in my example with janitorial, if you said, I want to buy a janitorial business, well, then you could engage with that person and learn some more about it and amortize the cost of the time with them over many deals that you might look at. But you take it step by step so that if, for example, the financial due diligence shows that there's a problem, you can pull out of the deal before you've engaged the attorney much, right? And so you kind of follow a process that makes sense where you're checking one thing after another so that if a problem comes up, you have not gotten so deeply into the investment of investigation. But there's people all the time who spend tens of thousands of dollars on due diligence, and at the end of the day, the deal doesn't happen. And it is definitely, one of the things that can happen for sure.
So you said you make an offer first,
Mm-hmm.
and then if the offer is accepted, then you start the due diligence. What are
Right.
the legal conditions of an offer?
It's usually completely open. So, like the offer will say, um, it's subject to due diligence, is subject to financing. The document that I like to use with my clients say that the offer is subject to the final approval of both parties' attorneys. Like, so they're basically saying we're agreeing to this stuff, but at the end of the day, if either one of our attorneys doesn't like it, it doesn't stand. So it's a completely open-ended thing. But the whole point is that it gets something on the table so that you can start to go back and forth. If you make an offer on a business and it turns out that you're offering far, far less than the seller would entertain taking, they're just going to say no, and you will walk away without having invested anything further. And that's what you want. You only want to really engage and spend money investigating something where you at least know that you're on the same page to begin with about where this price or terms are going to be.
Yep, absolutely. How much money does a person have to buy a small business? What's the range?
Yeah, there's a rule of thumb that I've come up with. Uh, so for Americans, I would say you need about 50% of what the seller's discretionary earnings is of the business. So, and we can get into what these terms are, but basically, seller's discretionary earnings is the cash flow to an owner operator that works full time in the business. And out of that cash flow, they have to cover many different things. They have to service the debt that they take on. They've got to take home a salary. They've got to pay taxes on whatever the profit of the business is. They have to do capital expenditures um, in order to replace and maintain equipment, that kind of stuff. That all comes out of seller's discretionary earnings. So if a business has an SDE of 200 grand, an American could probably make a deal happen if they had about 100,000 in cash. And by buyer, I mean, whoever is going to own the equity. So that could be you as an individual, could be you with some partners. There are people that do some of these deals by bringing some investors together. Typically, the smaller the deal, the harder it is. A lot of people who get into buying a business also have, like an independence streak. They want to be the captain of their own ship. And so they often don't want to have those kinds of partners. For anyone in other parts of the world, it's probably more like 75 or 80% of the seller's discretionary earnings is required. And the difference is that in the States, there's the Small Business Administration. And so they run a program that allows for higher degrees of leverage on business acquisition.
I was talking to a friend the other day about why America has so many businesses. And I'm sure that the Small Business Administration has to be part of that. Like they are really incentivizing small businesses and making it easier to buy.
Now, it's a direct subsidy to the acquisition of small business
Hmm.
by the government. And let me explain how, because people are going to say, wait, it's a subsidy. Yeah, it is. So here, I'll explain it to you. If 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 there was no SBA loan available and you wanted to borrow money to buy a business and you wanted to borrow half the money to buy the business, then a lender might say, okay, well, I'll lend you the money at a certain percentage rate because of the risk we're undertaking. So in that scenario, we're assuming that you're putting half down, you're borrowing the other half from a bank. Let's say, for example, you wanted to only put a quarter down, you wanted to borrow 3/4 from the bank. Well, that would be riskier, right? So a logical response from the lender would be to want a higher rate of interest to compensate for the higher risk. And then if you said, I only want to put 10% down, I want to borrow 90%, you're going another magnitude higher in risk. So you would expect the bank to want an even higher rate of interest if they were going to entertain that deal at all, right? And so with the SBA loan program, it doesn't matter if you borrow 50, 75, or 90% of the money. The interest rate's always the same because it's ultimately backed by the US federal government. And in the SBA loan program, it simply says that there's a floating rate plus certain percentage points is what the loans are priced at. And so the risk premium that would normally be there for someone to borrow a really high percentage of the value of the business is gone. And so, yeah, so there is, in a sense, a subsidy towards this activity in the U.S.
That's amazing. Wait, so one second. So do SBA loans do the same due diligence with the person who wants to take out the loan as a bank will, for instance? So is it very easy to get a 90% loan on a business?
So the SBA doesn't make loans; they guarantee them. So it's a bank that makes the loan, and in order to get the guarantee from the SBA, the bank has to go through an exhaustive due diligence process on the borrower and on looking at the business too. There's lots of check boxes and all kinds of things, and in very minute detail. I had a client actually in Washington State buying a business that was almost entirely virtual. It's a business that pretty much runs in the cloud. There are employees, and they did have an office. And in the due diligence by the bank, it was determined that the office actually was in a place that was rated as a flood zone area, and the business didn't have flood insurance. Now, if there ever was a flood coming, everyone would just pack up their computers and leave, and the business would be fine. But ultimately, the bank could not do the loan until the flood insurance was in place. So the deal was delayed by a month because I guess you have to have a 30-day waiting period for flood insurance. They don't want to sell it while the waters are rising. So the whole deal had to wait for this 30-day period to lapse for this insurance policy to come into place. So they're very detailed, and of course they're trying to be cautious. They don't want to have bad debts, but at the same time, the bank isn't taking the risk that they would if it was just them making a loan. Because ultimately, if the business fails, the SBA kind of insurance backstops the loan, and they get most of their money back from the SBA.
That's incredible. Wow. And do you have to apply for an SBA loan when you apply for the bank loan, or do you just apply for the bank loan and the SBA automatically kicks in? It's automatically there.
So it's when you talk with the banker, you say, what are my options? And if you choose to go down the path of an SBA loan, then all the documentation and everything has to be done at that time, like as you go down that pathway.
Yeah. Incredible. Okay.
Mm.
So you should have about 50% of SDE.
Mm-hmm.
And from the videos I've watched before, it seems like businesses are generally worth 3x SDE. Is that right?
No.
Oh, it was 3x EBITDA. I forget.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
and I really appreciate, Serene, that you misspoke that, because I'll tell you what happens all the time. 3 times EBITDA is a common rule of thumb for valuing businesses based on EBITDA, and buyers will sometimes find information, news, something written somewhere where it talks about multiples of cash flow, and they'll use a multiple that they found and they'll apply it to the wrong cash flow level. So if you took an EBITDA multiplier and you applied it to SDE, you would end up overpaying for the business. I recently released a podcast in October of 2024 about a young woman and her husband who did just that. And so they ended up overpaying for the business, and there's no cash flow. I mean, they are working in their business and they're not able to take a salary out because so much of the cash flow is going to debt service. And that's not the scenario you want to be in. The reason you want to buy a business, to the point earlier in the conversation, is you want to acquire a cash flow. And there's a bunch of different cash flows in the world you can acquire. So for example, you could buy a government bond and they'll pay you a coupon, and the government never goes bankrupt. And that's a very secure cash flow, and it would be a very expensive cash flow, right? You pay $1,000 for a bond and you're going to get whatever the coupon is, 4 or 5% or whatever, but you don't worry that it could disappear. Small businesses are at the other end of the spectrum from that. There's a very high risk. Small businesses go out of business all the time. And so that cash flow that you acquire, instead of paying, 20 times the cash flow, which would be the case of a 5% government bond, you're going to pay 2 times the cash flow because it's just so much riskier. And you want to acquire that cash flow. And the reason you're paying for that, you're paying the seller, is so that you can step right into their shoes and enjoy the same kind of lifestyle and benefits that they have for having the business. So you should be able to pay yourself a fair market wage for the type of work that you're going to be doing. If running this business shouldn't, if a stranger was hired to run the business and they were going to be paid 75 grand, then as the buyer, you should be paid 75 grand for running it day to day and being in the business all day. So when you look at the seller's discretionary earnings, you take a piece out for yourself, for your salary, and then you have to figure all those other expenses into what's left. So there's the debt service, taxes, capital expenditures are one that people often overlook, because when seller's discretionary earnings is calculated, depreciation and amortization are added back. And those are expenses that accountants use to describe things wearing out. The reason it's added back is because they call them non-cash expenses, because you don't actually write a check for your depreciation bill. But depreciation is real. Stuff wears out. Trucks get older and older, require more and more repairs. Eventually, you want to replace it. So the replacement of that stuff comes out of your SDE, because capital expenditures have been removed from the SDE calculation. And so when you fit all those things in, the numbers have to work. If it doesn't, I would argue it doesn't make sense to do the acquisition. And what happens when you have an increasing number of people who come across some of this content and they get excited, people who go to business school and learn that publicly traded companies sell for 20 times projected EBITDA on the stock market, and then find out they can buy a small business for 3 times EBITDA, they go, wow, it's so cheap, it's such a great deal, it's such a good investment. They get excited and they chase after a deal, and they get themselves in trouble, because even at that 3 times, it could still not be a good deal. If it's a capex intensive business and it requires a lot of reinvestment, that you could get a couple years in and realize, oh my goodness, we can't afford to replace the stuff that's breaking down and wearing out.
I was looking up I was just asking ChatGPT about the difference between EBITDA and SDE, and it was saying that EBITDA is generally used for large businesses, and SDE is usually used for small businesses, because sellers' discretionary earnings are based on like individual things an owner might do, whereas but I don't fully understand. Can you
Sure.
try to explain the difference for me?
Yeah. So EBITDA is, you get to the net income on the P&L, and then it's earnings before, so that from that net income number we start to add things back in. So we add back in the interest, we add back in the taxes, the income taxes specifically is what it means. We add back the depreciation, we add back the amortization. Now here's the logic behind this. We add back the interest because we don't know how a buyer is going to finance the acquisition.
Sorry, which interest? So the interest on a loan?
Yeah. So if a business is got debts and it's paying interest, we want to add that back, because the cost of capital, the debts, everything that the business has could be very different from the way the buyer finances it. Right? We don't know. So we add back the interest, and then we say, out of this EBITDA number, the buyer has to figure out what their debt service is going to be based on their circumstances, which could be very different from the circumstances of the seller.
Can I pause? Can I pause you there? I'm just a little bit confused. So let's say I have a business and I take out a loan for the business. I take out $100,000 loan. It's 5% interest, so I'm paying $5,000 a year, and so that's the interest you're talking about. And then I sell the business to you. Why would that $5,000 a year be different for you than for me?
Because I might buy your business with an SBA loan that costs me 9.75% interest. Right? So in that example, my cost of capital is higher than yours, because maybe you're a business owner with a net worth of $3 million and you get the most preferential line of credit interest rate that the bank has to offer, because your personal guarantee is very strong. And so your circumstances don't match mine. So we add back the interest so that it's part of that EBITDA cash flow for me to quote unquote spend on my own cost of capital in my own financing. Did I make that clear?
Maybe, but I didn't quite get it. So so the business is taking out a loan, and it's 5% interest, and you're saying that if you buy the business, you're paying a different amount of interest on that same loan?
Well, okay, so when businesses are sold, there's 2 ways to sell a business. You can sell the shares of a business, or you can sell the assets of a business. In an asset sale, typically debts don't transfer. So the buyer gets their own debts to buy the assets of the business, and the seller uses that money to extinguish any debts that they might have. Certain operating capital components often don't transfer in an asset sale either. In a share sale, most of the time, the sort of terms of sale will be what's called a cash-free, debt-free basis, with the idea being that the seller will remove cash and pay off all the debts of the business. Why? Well, because small businesses don't borrow like IBM. Like big corporations borrow in their own name. Like they're so big and they're credit worthy that a bank will lend money to IBM, for example. But in the world of small business, it's very difficult for a business to actually get debt in its own name. So almost all debts of small businesses are guaranteed by their owners, by the owner of the business. So if I sell the shares of my company to you, I don't want you to take over the debt because my name's still on it as a personal guarantee. If you mess up the payments, the bank's going to call on me. So I'm going to make sure that that debt is paid off in the transaction so that my liabilities get released.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, now the second question I have is why would the interest be on the EBITDA? Because if I'm paying the interest, but it's going to be paid off anyway, why would that be on the statement for when you're buying?
Well, so we're talking about a P&L, a profit and loss statement that is prepared not for the purposes of selling a business. It's prepared for tax purposes, right? To fill in the tax return and stuff like that. So we start at the net income and then we move up and we add back things that were taken out to get to the net income. So in your example of the business that paid $5,000 in interest, if their net income was $100,000, we would add back that interest and we would say the earnings before interest were 105. And then we're going to add back the taxes and we're going to add back depreciation and amortization. We might crawl back up to 150.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's EBITDA of 150 on a business whose net income was 100. Now to get to SDE, we then have to add back the compensation of the owner.
Yep.
So if the owner of that business paid themselves, let's say a fair market wage of 100 grand, then we would go from 150 of EBITDA up to 250 of SDE. The reason ChatGPT gave you the answer about small businesses and larger businesses comes from another angle too. So in larger businesses, and what I've always said to people is that businesses with an EBITDA over $500,000 typically sell for multiples of EBITDA. And if the cash flow is under $500,000, they sell for multiples of SDE. It's got to do with the mentality of the buyers. So in the larger of the two, in the larger businesses, the buyers would tend to be more sophisticated people that would understand the difference between the value of their day-to-day work and an investment return from buying a business. So if they're going to go work in the business, they're going to say, well, my time and effort are worth the salary, and the EBITDA represents the cash flow of the business investment, and I have to service my business investing needs from that EBITDA. In the world of the smaller businesses, you're talking about somebody who is asking a very basic question. If I buy this business, how much money do I get? And they're going to buy the business and go work there in order to get that cash flow. And so it's more of a, I guess, someone who's mixing an investment and a job seeker hat or mentality together at the same time. Because most of those businesses, by and large, are going to be operated day to day by their owners.
Mm-hmm. Another stupid question, just while we're on a roll. So why wouldn't the owner be considered an employee? And wouldn't the owner just be paid like an employee? Or I think for tax reasons, taking profit out of the business as an owner is probably more advantageous. Is that right? Instead of paying yourself like an employee, or is that not true?
So it has to do with the organization that you're using and how you've structured it. So there's different kinds of legal structures for businesses. You can have a corporation referred to as a C Corp, where the corporation is a completely different legal person. And the owner, if they're going to work there, would write themselves a W-2 and they'd be on the payroll and all that kind of stuff. And any money coming out of that business would be a dividend that would be issued to them as a shareholder. A lot of small businesses, though, are organized in what's called an LLC, which is called a pass-through company, or they're in something called an S-election corporation, which is, again, a pass-through entity. So what a pass-through entity simply refers to is that the activity of the business is kind of just taxed at the rate of the owner, the tax rate of the owner, kind of like all together as though they're one income. And so a lot of these businesses, the owner will not put themselves on the payroll. They won't take they might take money every 2 weeks like the employees do, but they're not going to include themselves in the payroll. They're just letting that profit fall to the bottom line, because at the end of the year, they're just going to end up paying tax on it as though they had taken it as payroll. And so it, it this is where this is important, is when you're looking at a business, is understanding what the owner currently is doing. Because if they are writing themselves a W-2 and their pay does appear in the wage and salary line of the expenses, then you need to know that part of that money is going to be available for you. Or if they're just letting their compensation fall to the bottom line, you just need to be aware. So it's one of the questions that you have to ask when you're examining those financial statements.
Wow. Thank you. Okay. What are the common pitfalls that a lot of people make when buying a business?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. The worst ones are when people don't quite know what to be careful of. So I'll give you an example. I got a consulting call from a gentleman who was a C-level executive with a big company, very experienced business person, very educated person, went looking for a business to buy and found a flood and fire restoration company. Really liked that business. And in talking with the seller, found out that they did insurance work for damaged homes from over 40 different insurance companies. Now, what he didn't know is that in that industry, there are these third-party companies that administer these contracts to do the repairs. And so while it was true that the company did do work for over 40 different insurance companies, those 40 insurance companies were represented by 3 of these intermediaries. And so really, there were 3 points of contact for all the revenue of this company. When he bought the company, they were doing over $2 million a year in revenue. After he bought the company, one of those companies decided to not do business with him anymore, and his revenue dropped by almost a half. And he immediately could no longer afford to pay himself. He had to let people go. And he was basically in survival mode for years after that. And what was amazing is that he did not understand that. And so this lends itself to what I was saying earlier about how it can really pay to get some expert advice on a particular industry, because it's the things that you just don't know that are going to be the things that ultimately get you. I've seen people ill prepared with respect to operating capital. So I mentioned earlier that sometimes businesses sell in an asset deal or a share deal. If you're going to buy a business in an asset sale, what will often sometimes happen is the seller will want to keep their cash, their receivables, and they will take care of the payables. So the whole idea is that they get to collect the money from the work that they did. What that means for a buyer, though, is it means you're going to take over a business which issues invoices to its customers. So on the day you take over, you could have to do a month or more of work before the first jobs that you did start to be paid and you get checks in the mail. And so what that means as a buyer is not only do you have to pay the seller, but you have to put money into your own business in order to cover all the expenses, wages, labor, etc., until the cash starts to arrive. This is, it's called cash flow. And what I just described to you is called the cash conversion cycle. Like, how long does it take from the moment we deliver something for a client in order to start to get the money in the door? And so a lot of people will get into a business with insufficient operating capital, and they'll be in a jam. I do a special series every year over winter where I discount consulting calls on the condition that they be released publicly. I did one a couple of years ago about a guy who was buying a landscaping company. And just like the janitorial example I gave before, landscaping is great because you've got, people are paying you every month typically over the season. And so there's good cash flow. And they were supposed to close their deal in the summertime. Different things happened that caused delays, and they only closed the deal in the fall. Well, what happens in the fall, like in Pennsylvania? The
Yeah.
grass stops growing, right? And so they did snow removal, but it was a very light snow year. And so what ended up happening is that they just weren't getting the money in. and they were in a crisis. And when the guy called me, he's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm like going to run out of money. And so I gave him some strategies, but it was basically trying to find short-term sources of capital just to survive and pay the bills until they could get to springtime and start doing work for their customers again. And not planning out the cash flow is a mistake that people make. The other mistake that people make is not realizing that if they have to put up operating capital, that's part of their investment. All the money you lay out to acquire a cash flow is the price you're paying for it. So if a business has let's say an SDE of $250,000 and you agree to pay $500,000 for that business because that's what that cash flow is worth to you. But then when you get through the due diligence, you realize, hey, I'm going to have to put $100,000 in to make this business work. If you make both of those payments, you've just paid $600,000 for the cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's a mistake people make. Then they end up overpaying because they don't understand that what the operating capital demands are going to be.
So the business might actually be worth 400,000 then to buy. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if that business were going to be put up for sale as a stock sale, and sold to someone who said, hey, I need to make sure that I buy the shares of this company with everything it needs to go, that they might determine that this company needs to have $100,000 of operating capital in it when it's sold in order to function. When you do the asset sale, now all of a sudden people are saying, I want to keep my receivables, keep my cash. Components of the operating capital are being removed.
Yeah.
And this is something that gets less sophisticated buyers. They get trapped by this, or they get told by a business broker, oh yeah, the seller's operating capital is not included. You have to go get a line of credit somewhere. So, there's two ways to get operating capital. You either put up your own money or you borrow it. But if you borrow it, then you have that interest expense, and that diminishes the cash flow that you were supposed to enjoy because you have to pay interest on it.
So I've heard a lot of influencers talk about seller finance sales. So they say you can go and buy a business and you have zero money down and the seller will pay for all of it. How does that work?
Well, I guess it depends on whether or not you can find someone desperate enough to sell it to you who will trust you enough to give you their business and take nothing down. And so I'll say this about zero down deals. Businesses are bought by people who use none of their own money. It's true, but it's very rarely done by people who are broke. When people talk about this kind of thing, what they're trying to do is they're trying to get people excited about the idea that they can somehow get their hands on something of value, a cash flowing, profitable business, even though they have nothing of value to exchange for it. So it's just a twist on like a get rich quick sort of positioning. I'll give you an example of a real no money down deal. You want to hear this one?
Absolutely.
So, and this comes from an advertisement for a bank. Okay, so this is a story publicized by a bank who did the deal. So it was a trucking company in Alberta, Canada, and the bank was BDC. And you can probably Google this and find it. I made a video once where I looked at their website. They had like an advertisement that explained the story. So the seller of this business hired someone to be a manager, and the two men worked together for several years. They got to know each other. They really trusted each other, and the seller really liked the younger man who was the manager and wanted him to take over. So they went down to the BDC, and the BDC made them a loan, as big a loan as they could based on the trucks and equipment and tools and machinery of the business. So imagine a business with no debt, and now all of a sudden the business has a huge debt. Okay. So the value of the equity of the company is decreased because now the company has a debt on it, right? So let's say the company maybe was worth $1 million and then they took on this big debt. Now it's only worth a few $100,000. The debt, the money from the debt was given to the seller in the form of a dividend. And so it was taken out of the company. The seller then sells the shares of the company to the manager and agrees to finance it on a note, which means that the manager is paying 400,000, let's say in our example, but they pay that over time. So let's consider the situation that they're in. The seller of the business got the money from the bank on closing day and will receive the other money over a period of time. However, the seller is probably on that loan as a personal guarantor, right? So what did the buyer need in order to make that zero down deal work for him?
Trust and long-standing relationship.
Exactly. And so now imagine yourself cold calling a business owner saying that you want to buy their business. You meet them a couple times, make them an offer, and then you say, "Oh, by the way, trust me, I'm good for it. I'll pay you after I take over."
Yep. Yep.
Right? Like, how's that going to work? Right? And so again, it's people will whip up these ideas. They'll build these online courses and they'll put all this stuff into it. And then they'll find people who maybe are desperate to make a change, who really want to get ahead. They'll tell them that zero down deals are possible, um, to get people excited to invest in the stuff that they're selling. And what happens a lot of the time is that people will go out and they'll try to apply these things they've learned. They'll go out there and they'll make offers and they'll talk to people, and one after another, these deals will fall apart. Uh, Business brokers now increasingly will not even release information to people unless they can demonstrate some degree of financial ability, because they've had so much of their time wasted by people who've gone through these programs. On my YouTube channel, I interviewed a guy named Carlos, who's a really smart engineer from Texas. And he got excited and he bought one of these courses, and they claimed to have a guarantee, and they taught him a whole bunch of stuff. He tried to do it. After a while, he realized this is not going to work. Like he started to realize that what he was asking was just not feasible.
Do you know specifically what they were teaching that didn't work?
Well, just that you have to find someone who's super motivated. Like the only person who's going to sell a business and just hand the keys to a stranger for no money down is someone who literally doesn't have any other choice,
Mhm.
right? Someone once left a comment on a YouTube video that I made. And I've got all my no money down videos in one tab on my blog site. I've collected them all together as a place for people to go and get some serious second thought and consideration before they buy one of these programs. Um, and somebody made a comment that they got a job once in a city in California, working in a trucking business, and all of a sudden the owner got thrown in jail, and he was able to make a deal with the owner to buy the company and pay him over time because he was in jail. And so that would be an example of a very motivated seller.
Yep. Amazing. What a deal.
And what's worse is that there are people out there who will say, well, these tactics work even better if you can buy a business that is somehow in distress and needs to be turned around. There is an association out there of turnaround experts. It's a global trade association, and they are very, very, very proud of their success rate. I think that they claim that they've turned around about 18% of the cases they've worked on.
Yep.
18%.
The
Like
experts, the best ones
it
in the field.
right. And you're talking about buying a business which has an owner sometimes who's been there for years or decades, and that with all of their experience and all their knowledge, they can't make money with it. And so if you buy a business like that, um, what does it mean? It means you don't have an asset. You don't have a cash flowing asset. What you've done is you've acquired a liability. So you may be able to negotiate with the seller to get it with no money being given to the seller on closing day, but you immediately have to have money to finance the losses until you make the changes required to make the business function.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't know how long that will be. There's just a real desperate desire from some people to. You ever watch the old X-Files?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So Mulder in his apartment, he had that poster that said, "I want to believe." This is what I see in this space, is that there are people who just want to believe it's possible. I've seen people go down this rabbit hole for years, where if they had applied some old school, you know, work two jobs, side hustle, I don't know, buy and sell cars on the side or whatever, save money, live below your means, build up a nest egg, get some cash reserves, meet some other people that are hungry and ambitious. Maybe you start working together, right? And then get something going. And, but the problem is that takes time,
Mm-hmm.
and people want an instant solution. And, that's probably being fueled a little bit by some of the stuff people see in social media. They don't have the patience, or they see somebody who purports to have gotten rich overnight with some kind of crypto token or something. And so they're like, yeah, I want that. And I deserve that. And I should be able to do it easily and quickly and, get everything I want right away. But that's not really how the world works.
Yep. Andy Hickman, I follow him on X. He's the husband of a friend of mine, Katura Abigail, and he travels around America and he blogs about it. He's done very well for himself. He was talking about how you can go to small towns, and if you're willing to live there, you can find an old guy who runs a pub. Like, not every town is going to have it, but a lot of towns have an older guy who doesn't have anyone to pass on his business to, and you can work in that pub for a year or two and talk to him maybe up front about, I want to buy this from you, and then take it over from him. And you can probably get, if you're willing to travel, if you're willing to live in the middle of nowhere, if you're willing to do like these really exceptional things, it sounds like seller financing is very possible. Or if you have a good social network, if you know the right people, if your family owns a business, something like that, it does sound like seller financing is possible, but these courses are probably not the way.
So let's look at the term, though, seller financing, because here's, like a lot of things, something becomes easier to share with people if there's some nugget of truth in it. So the reality is that almost every business that is sold has some degree of seller financing, but not 100%, right? And so there's usually three components to the way a buyer buys a business. Some money that comes from the buyer, the down payment or equity. There's a lot of different terms for it, but it's money from the buyer or buyers or investors, whatever. And then there may be some bank financing, not in every deal, but a lot of them, right? Especially if someone wants to take advantage of like that small business program, the small business administration program. So the seller usually has to fill some kind of gap. And like I said before, the seller financing is important as a sort of a guarantee to the buyer, because often there will be an offset clause that says if there's some kind of problem or it turns out that the seller lied about something, we can offset our damages against that note. A lot of businesses are sold with like a 5, 10, 15, 20% note. I personally don't like to see them under 30. I like to see a material amount of seller financing. From the seller's point of view, okay, they feel like their note isn't very solid from a lending point of view, because if there's a bank there, the bank is going to force them to sign all this subordination documentation, which says that the bank's in charge, the bank gets the money first, all the shots are called by the bank is in charge of everything, right? So as a creditor, the seller doesn't have a lot of power in this relationship. But if there's no bank, so things change. So I've seen many deals done where a buyer only has 30 or 40% down and a seller finances the entire balance.
Mm-hmm.
And what's different is the seller gets all the rights that a bank normally has in that scenario, because there is no bank. So the seller becomes the first position lien holder on that.
So they can take
And
back the business if it doesn't work,
yeah,
if they don't pay the debt.
yeah.
Okay.
And even if there is a bank loan, if the person's having trouble, if the buyer's having trouble, one of the moves that they could make is they could go to the seller and say, look, I'm not going to make it here. Why don't you take over the business again and you take over my loan?
Mm-hmm.
And some sellers might, because think about the seller, they collected all the cash from the buyer and the bank loan. and maybe they collected payments on their seller note for a few years. So they now have an opportunity to take back their old business just by assuming the debt. And if they think they can fix it, they might. And there are many cases where people have. But from in the case where the buyer is putting down, say, 30 or 40% of the money or 50% and asking the seller to finance the balance, the seller's note is in a stronger position from a lending point of view. That's the first thing. But the second thing is that the buyer's commitment is indisputable, because the buyer has put a huge amount of money down of their own savings, right? So the term people use is skin in the game. How much skin does someone have in the game? And the whole idea is that the more skin you have in the game, the more you are going to fight, scratch, scrabble, and fight, and just put all your effort into making sure it works, because you don't want to lose that money. If you're 22 years old and you don't have any net worth, and you borrow 90% SBA money, and you buy a business and it doesn't work out, well, what do? Well, you just go bankrupt.
Yeah.
Like, and you have 7 years of bad credit or whatever, and eventually you'll come back out of it. But somebody who saves up 400 grand and then uses that to buy $1 million business, that's a lot to lose. And so that seller knows, hey, this person is going to do whatever it takes. They're going to listen to my advice, right? And that seller's, in every case, a seller needs to do a good job of picking the right buyer. Just that's the only security they really have of collecting all those note payments, is choosing the right person.
Wow. Okay. What would you say the best businesses are to get into? Which ones do you see the highest success with?
Um, there's a real appetite there's a whole online community called Entrepreneurship Through Acquisition, ETA, and they really like the service businesses that don't have a lot of inventory or capital expenditures. And it's because of that CapEx that I was talking about earlier. Equipment intensive businesses require a lot of reinvestment. And if you're going to look at businesses and value them based on EBITDA or SDE, you're going to end up in trouble. So people will lean towards those businesses that are more service businesses and things like that. I always say that the best business for someone is the business that you can improve. The absolute best scenario to get into is to buy a business that is profitable, number one, but has problems you know how to fix to become more profitable. And so you buy the business and you've got unlimited runway with which to work on the business and make it better because it's already profitable. And so then every incremental improvement you make that improves the bottom line, improves the scenario that you're in, improves your cash flow, improves the deal, improves the value of the business. Earlier at the beginning of the conversation, you mentioned a word. You said you were looking at flipping businesses. You remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to address that, because that's another sort of buzzword, right? Like people think of flipping houses. And so the reality of the world of small business is that the valuation multiples are so low. Like most of the time when I talk with a seller and I'll say, hey, I think I can sell your business for 2.2 times SDE or something, most of them will just say, well, why would I do that? I could just keep it over the next 2 years. I'd earn all that money and I'd still have it. And they would be absolutely correct. That's why when I mentioned the top 5 reasons people sell a small business, cashing out was not one of them, right? People in Silicon Valley cash out. Well, like Mark Zuckerberg cashes out when he sells some of his stock, right? So in the world of small business, if you buy a business and it is a good cash flowing business that delivers for you all the time, it is almost certainly worth more to you than any other person will pay for it. So the idea that you would buy a business and then sell it again, it doesn't happen. Like people buy them and they keep them, right? Until one of those pressing personal concerns comes up that forces you to have to sell it because you just can't run it anymore. Um, I had a conversation with someone the other day who called in for a consult, and he wanted to get his business ready for sale, and his goal was to buy a bigger business. And the problem with the scenario he was contemplating is that there's no way to control the timeline of finding and acquiring the bigger business, right? So what I advised him to do was to not put his business up for sale, but rather to keep working on improving it, trying to make the cash flow better and better all the time, search for the bigger business, look for that opportunity. Um, and when that other opportunity comes along, know who is available to buy your business quickly. What does that mean? Well, it's almost certainly someone who's in the same industry, maybe a competitor, but it makes more sense to hang on to the business and enjoy the cash flow than to sell it and put money in the bank, pay a business broker's commission and all that kind of thing, and then worry about eroding the capital for living expenses while you're looking for that other business, right? If it takes you a year to find that other business, you would have wished that you'd kept the business and it had the cash flow for the year, right? There's so many unknowns, and there's a term called effectuation, and there's a lady who's done all kinds of research on this on entrepreneurship, and I believe she coined the term. I can't remember her name. I did a video series this summer on my YouTube channel, and one of the videos was about effectuation, and she's researching how entrepreneurs do things, and if you read the popular stuff, it'll say look for a need, right? Look for a need, then you address the market with a product or whatever. And she says that's not really what most entrepreneurs do. What most entrepreneurs do is they say, what resources do I have access to that I control? What can I deliver? And what can I offer for sale without putting too much at risk? And it's all these baby steps towards risk management and understanding what you do control and what you don't control. And so the actual evolution of a lot of businesses, if you think, okay, someone knows how to install roofing shingles, and so they do that for work, and then, what business do they want to start when they decide to go out on their own? Well, they start a roofing business because at least they've got product and service delivery all wrapped up. They know that stuff. Now it's just about making a sale, right? And it just seems so natural, but the sorry, I lost track of my thoughts. What were we talking about?
Yeah.
So, okay. So, all right. So we were talking about the guy who was going to sell the business. So, you want to have and I explained to him, like, it makes more sense to not sell the business. And then if you find the other deal and you need the capital for your down payment on the other deal, have a list of suitors who might buy your existing business quickly, go to them and just offer it at a 20% discount to what it should sell for, right? It's going to be really alluring to them, but you're going to more than earn that 20% in the time span you held on to it.
Yep. I'm also surprised these people, there isn't more hiring of a CEO to take your place, because, or some sort of manager to take your place. Like, if you could hire a manager that was being paid 70 grand a year and you still made a profit on top of that, why wouldn't you? And why aren't more of these people doing this?
Because there's always going to be things that you will never, ever delegate. So for example, you have a small business, it's got 4 employees, and you make one of them the manager, and they run everything day to day. But when a piece of machinery breaks, are you going to empower that person to just call a repairman every time? Or do you want to have some input into that? What is often missing from the manager conversation is just the fact that most of these small businesses are an enormous portion of these owners' net worth. It's all tied up in this one really risky asset. And nobody's going to care about it in the same way as the owner. I had a restaurateur tell me once, I was talking with him, and we were talking about the difference between an owner-run business and a manager-run business. And he said he can walk into his walk-in cooler every day, and let's say he notices, some chicken or something, and The next day he walks by and it's still there, and he's like, we're not selling much chicken. We can't last much longer, so we better make up a chicken special and we'll sell this chicken, right? Where a manager could just keep walking by it every day and then he'll say, oh, that's gone bad, and he'll throw it out,
Yep.
right? Because the owner sees the chicken as his money sitting there, and it's got to be salvaged, it's got to move, we got to do something with it to save it. Whereas for the employee, it's not the same. They don't, even if they have some kind of compensation package based upon performance of the business, profit sharing or something like that, there's been no cash investment. I run into this sometimes with owners who try to incentivize employees with shares. So you'll hear of someone who says, I really like this employee, I want to keep them around forever, so I made them a partner, I gave them some shares, thinking that this would give the employee the same sort of invested attitude that the owner has. But that rarely ever happens because the employee didn't pay for them, right? It was given.
I see. What if you offer the employee the ability to buy shares?
That is very different. It's very different because then the employee actually has to approach it from the attitude of do I see the long-term prospects of this place? Is it now something that I want to put my own savings and money into? I've worked with a couple of owners who've tried to do deals with people working for them to become buyers. I'll give you an example of a method that some people do. So you take an employee who you feel has a good opportunity to run the business, and you say, I'm going to make you a manager and teach you more about how to run the business. Most people would say that that was an opportunity. They would say, yeah, that's great. I want to do more. I'm ambitious. I want to rise up and do something more. So you make them the manager, you teach them more skills, more ability, and then you give them some kind of profit sharing plan or whatever. And when they earn these bonuses, you don't give them the money. Instead, what you do is you put it in a separate bank account and you say, this is your money, but we're just going to accumulate all your bonuses. And then after 3 or 4 years, that will be your down payment money to buy the business. And so if you do a good job and run the business well, the bonuses will cover the down payment. And then you'll have a bank loan or something, but then the business will be yours. Very few of these types of arrangements that I've worked on have worked out. At some point, the amount of money in the bank account gets to a critical mass, like $10,000 or $15,000, and then the person wants to buy a car or something.
Well, I could imagine you might want to put it in the stock market. I mean, you could be getting a 7% return. You could be getting something, and it's just sitting there in the bank. It's a little bit annoying, but I can see why it's much safer in the bank too.
Well, but here's what it's like a proxy for commitment. It's not a proxy. It's an actual demonstrated manifestation of commitment.
Yes, it is. Yeah. You're also measuring whether that person has the ability to think long term or not.
And a propensity towards deferred gratification.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Which is a critical thing if someone's going to be successful in business, because there's always going to be an opportunity, for you to maybe take money out of a business that maybe there's a much better business case for doing something else with it in the business. Mm-hmm. And if you can't control yourself and you just want to, you just got to get that Lambo or whatever, the business isn't going to survive. So it's all of these character traits, like the ability to have long-term commitment, long-term planning, focus, deferred gratification. All of these things are sort of characteristics that I think are going to allow someone to be successful in business. One of I think I made a video years ago too about reasons not to buy a business. And I think I listed some of these things, like if you have some of the, the sort of the opposite traits of those, where I said those are reasons not to do it. If it's something someone really wants to do, they can always work to change, I guess.
Yeah. changing your character is difficult, but it's not impossible. Especially deferred gratification. I think especially, well, as I've gotten older, I've certainly gotten better at it. Also, I was not as good as deferred gratification when I was younger, but when I started putting money in the market, for instance, I wanted to keep it there. Like when you're doing something with the money, when there's something happening with it, at least for me, it's I want it there, I want to grow it. Whereas a savings account for me is just, it's kind of sitting there. I don't know. It's just how my brain works. I guess I'm much happier putting my money in the market than in a savings account.
Aren't you worried it'll drop?
Yeah, I mean, there's also diversity. So in the stock market is like one place to put it, but I also have a little video editing business, so I invested in there as well. I'm in the process of buying some laundry and dryer machines to do a little laundromat thing with the property owner I know.
So I sold a laundromat, and in my business broker days, and I kept in touch with the guys who bought it and dropped in on them every once in a while and talked with them and about how things were going. And one of the things that I can tell you about the laundromat business is that you need to learn like the top 20 repairs, like how to do them yourself.
My husband is a genius. That's one of the reasons why it works for us, because he's really good at repairs. Yeah, which thank God. He actually, speaking of capital expenditure, he buys I wasn't sure if I was going to talk about this, but he buys like old machines or broken machines from restaurants, and they'll get rid of these machines, these industrial machines, and they might cost $3,000 more. He buys them for $100. It's a quick fix, flips them for $1,000, over $1,000. Like, it's a couple hours of his time and maybe $20 of parts, and like, it's amazing. I think that's an owner thing as well. If the owner is there and they see the machine's broken, they might at least try to repair it before giving up on it. But a manager might just throw it out and spend another $3,000 if they have the access to that.
Yeah, it really comes down to the type of business and how they're organized and things like that. So that business owner person, let's say it's a small bakery and they're making bread and cookies and they've got a dough mixer or something, and it was a big investment for that owner, and those machines work all day long and it breaks. That person sees the outlay of money as their money. So if a new dough mixer is going to be $15,000 or $20,000, they're trying to avoid that. A big corporate entity, they might be more inclined to look at the downtime. So what they're saying is, geez, that machine is 15 years old and it's breaking down now. We could repair it, but what if it starts breaking every few months? And then we get sales interruptions, productivity interruptions, etc. Whereas if we buy a brand new one, it might come with a 5 or 10 year warranty. And so to them, it might make more sense just to replace it. Yeah.
The main machines are dough machines, actually, that he fixes.
Well, I've seen them. I know they go.
It's amazing.
And there are actually people out there who go looking for some of the older ones because they're more robust. Like the way they're made, sometimes with like cast iron feet and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. And the break is like the last two that we had it's a fuse, like it's a broken fuse. It's fine. Or like the belt comes off and you just need to put the belt back on. Like literally you could lift it up and then adjust the belt and then put the thing back on, and you've saved yourself $3,000 buying a new one. It's amazing. Yeah, it helps to be handy. I'm so glad he's handy. It's great. I wouldn't have. I don't know. Maybe I would have figured it out, but
it's a great opportunity. I sold an old snowblower to a guy who does that too. When he came to buy it, he had a whole trailer full of them. That he was going around
cool.
picking up old snowblowers and then he was going to repair and resell them. So I think that's great.
Yeah. So we're doing a laundromat thing now. Like, we know the owner, we have a relationship with them, so it's okay. They have a bigger complex, but if it works out, we could. There are other services that we found that they'll install the laundry machine and the dryer in your apartment complex, and then they'll take a cut. They'll take $3 out of the $4 that a customer spends or something like that, and just handle. I think the main thing is that you have to make sure there's very little downtime. So if it gets broken, you have to carry a very large machine to the shop and bring it back very quickly, or replace it if it's going to take some time. So I think that's the main issue. And also, but like they also don't make a crazy amount of money. Like they might make you between 5 and 10 grand a year for a larger apartment complex. But I think it's just, if you have enough of them and you have enough buildings, if you work with enough buildings, then you can make a sizable income.
I remember back when I was younger, before I had a washer and dryer at my house, I used to really like going to laundromats because you can do like 7 loads of laundry simultaneously, by using 7 machines or whatever. It always struck me as very efficient.
Yeah, you can get a big machine too. You can get like a 15 kilo washer, and you can just do a couple weeks worth of laundry all in the one thing.
Well, by that time you're wearing Halloween costumes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Or you have a shopping addiction. Either one. Which I do not. I'm more the Halloween costume type anyway. It works. I just wore a chicken costume to the Halloween party, so I could wear that again outside. You had this tweet that I want to ask you about. So, and by the way, please follow David C. Barnett on Twitter. Although there are many David C. Barnett and David Barnetts in the world.
If you look up David Barnett's small business anywhere, I'll come right up top.
Absolutely. If you look up, I want to buy a small business Reddit, he'll also come up, by the way, without even typing his name in. People will recommend him. So you said in this tweet, you said, for your first deals, do not exceed the monetary limit of your area's small claims court. In my province, I can sue someone by filing some papers and paying $100 fee for any amount up to $12,500. I've been to small claims court 5 times and have won every case. Invest local.
So that is with reference to this book. My first book that I wrote is called Invest Local. So it's all about doing small business loans, leases, and deals like that with small businesses. So for example, if you really want to amp up the profit on your husband's dough machine business, instead of selling the machines, when you buy them for $100 and you do the quick repair, you should lease them to people. Or you should sell them for top price, but offer to finance it and then collect interest on that. And so you could turn those machines into a source of steady, regular income when people make payments to you. Well, that's what that tweet was about, and is just about, if people want to explore these deals, like initially, keep yourself below that limit so that if you need to take legal recourse against someone, you can DIY it.
We were thinking about that. So we live in Australia. So very safe country, very stable country, but slightly different laws, obviously. But I mean, I think they're pretty comparable to America besides the SBA loans and stuff. It's just that we were thinking about leasing them out to people, but chasing someone, even with a contract, even with a great contract, chasing someone up for a $5,000 machine, I wonder how, like, people can kind of disappear off the map a little bit in these cases. I mean, how likely is that? How often have you seen that a lot?
Well, it's all about selecting who you do business with, right? Like, when I was married, my wife wanted to sell a used car, and I looked up online, and people were asking about $6,000 for these cars. The problem was there was like 7 of them, up for sale in town. So how would we sell ours? Well, we went to the dealership to talk about trading it in, but the dealership would only give us $3,000 for it, right? Because they got to make money on it. So what I did is I offered it up on a website, and I said, financing available with a reasonable down payment.
Okay.
But we asked $6,000, just like everybody else. People started emailing us like, what's this financing? How do you qualify? And I just replied, well, if you have a reasonable amount of money to put down, we'll finance the balance to the point of your seller financing. So this young couple came over and looked at the car, and they really liked it. And they said, yeah, we only have like $2,800 to put down. Is that reasonable? Would you accept that? We're like, yeah, we could work with that. And then the other 3,200, we accepted payments over 24 months. So their down payment was almost the same money the dealer was going to give us,
Amazing.
right? So what was the risk we were in, right? It turns out I live on the east coast of Canada. It turns out they moved to Calgary after 3 months, but they never missed a payment. They kept paying us, and they paid the whole thing. Like, most people want to pay their debts. Um, and whenever I've done any of these small business deals, for example, if we were going to lease one of those mixers to a bakery, um, I would put the lease in the business name, but I would ask the seller to sign a personal guarantee, not to personally guarantee the debt, but to personally guarantee the return of the equipment should the business default on the debt. See, when people fail in business, they don't feel good about it. Like, they feel embarrassed about it. They feel bad. They've let their family down. They've let their employees down. They may have legal troubles with their landlord. They're going to have collection agents calling them. They want a way out of those problems. And if the way out of the lease with you is simply to deliver it back to your house,
That's easy.
they'll do it. It's easy. Yeah.
Oh, that's a great point. Okay, I'll talk to him about that. That's a very good idea.
Yeah. And then you just,
Mhm.
refurb it again and go find someone else to lease it.
Yeah, those things last forever. Um,
Yeah.
so one more. If One more tweet. If sales can't be verified, don't believe in them. Sometimes business owners take cash in the form of undisclosed sales to avoid paying taxes on it. Either the seller proves it somehow or commits to a guarantee or warranty program. How are sales not verified? How does that happen?
So if you have a business that accepts cash and electronic payments, sometimes a seller will take the cash and put it in their pocket. It won't be deposited in the bank and it won't appear on the tax return. So the seller might claim when you go and talk with them that, hey, my numbers say there's $700,000 worth of revenue, but really there's more like 850 because of this other cash I don't declare. Well, either they prove it somehow, and usually they can't, or you want to protect yourself from this potential fraud, right? Because if it turns out this is a lie and the other $150,000 of revenue is not there, then the business isn't as good as they're claiming. And so protecting yourself through a warranty scheme, what I mean by that is, for that deal to happen, you would need a huge amount of seller financing. What I would say to that buyer is, I would say, what's the business worth to you if that income turned out to be not there at all? If it just wasn't true, what would the business be worth to you? That's going to set the limit of the amount of money you want to have as a down payment. Because remember the offset clause in the seller note? If it turns out those revenues are not true, then you want to be able to say, hey, you lied to me about the revenue. I'm not paying the note. And now you've paid that lower amount of money and you've gotten a lesser business, no doubt. But you're not going to pay the full price. And so a warranty clause would be literally in the note. You would say, if the sales in this business after 6 months, for example, hit this level, then the note, I will owe you this amount in the note, or this amount will be written off the note. And you have varying degrees of discounts on the note. So if it turns out that what they said didn't happen, you get these discounts. Like, you're basically not leaving it up to you having to sue him or anything. You're writing it right into the conditions of the note that these discounts get applied if it turns out they're lying. And you know, it's a great way to measure up the person you're doing business with. Because if you say to them, look, I believe you and I'm willing to pay the price, a price based on this revenue being there, let's do this deal. But if it turns out the revenue isn't there, we need a mechanism to make this adjustment. So the seller's got one of two choices. If they're telling the truth, and if they believe in you and your ability to run the business, then they're going to realize, hey, I've got an opportunity here to sell this business for more money based on what I've said it does. If they're lying, then you're not the right buyer for them. So they're going to say no to this arrangement, right? And so you will save yourself from that pain.
Yeah. And it seems like a great way to especially avoid court because nobody wants to go to court. But let's say the seller says, I make an extra $50,000 in cash. I just don't report on taxes.
Mm-hmm.
How much are you gonna do you then so add another $50,000 to the seller financing, or how does that work, that you'll then pay back?
So if there's an extra $50,000 of profitability and you're paying 2 times discretionary earnings, it could mean that the price of the business changes by 100 grand, right? So if there's $50,000 a year of extra income, that means after 6 months there should be 25, right? So in the seller note, what you would say, you would make sure that you had a seller note probably for, you know, far more than this extra $100,000. Maybe 200,000 would be the seller note you'd want to have at least. And so what you say in there is you say after 6 months, if this level of sales is not achieved, then I get to write $100,000 off this note.
Okay.
So if the money he claimed was there never materializes, then the extra he was being paid for the business also doesn't materialize.
I see. So if oh yep, that makes perfect sense. Okay. You still lose out long term in a way because you're expecting an extra 50 grand a year. I mean, you're just not getting that 50 grand a year. So it's, I guess but it doesn't incentivize the seller to deceive you though, because he's not getting any extra money.
That's right. And so, and if his goal is to be deceptive and to commit fraud against someone, he won't agree to that arrangement. And he'll say all kinds of different things, and you know, get angry and try to bully you and do all sorts of things. But at the end of the day, you're not the person he's looking for.
How often do you see people trying to commit fraud?
Well, since online businesses have come around,
Yeah.
it's a lot more frequent. Um, More often, we find mistakes when we're working with clients rather than fraud. Um, I'll give you a common example of a very frequent mistake. We mentioned earlier about where is the profit on the income statement or the P&L, right? Or where is the owner's salary? Sometimes, so for example, in Canada, it can often be more advantageous for an owner to take dividends rather than a regular employee salary. So the owner might be working in the business full time and taking no wage. So the money going to the owner doesn't appear in the salary line of the income statement, um, but they're taking a dividend. And so what'll happen is if you get to the wrong business broker who isn't quite knowledgeable, when they're doing that calculation of seller's discretionary earnings, they start at the net income line, they add back the interest, the taxes, the depreciation, the amortization. And then the broker will say, how much money are you paid? And the person will say, well, I take 100,000 in dividends. The inexperienced or unknowledgeable broker will then add that as well, and to create the seller's discretionary earnings. But the problem is dividends are not an expense on the income statement. Dividends is capital that comes off the balance sheet. So the dividends is the net income. The net income ends up in the equity section of the balance sheet. So that's the money the seller's taking. When the broker makes this mistake, they effectively double count the amount of the dividends. So the effect is it looks like the cash flow available in the business is much higher than it really is. And so we will often find that mistake where we'll be working with a client, we'll look at the business with them, something doesn't seem to make sense. We'll start asking some very specific questions, and then it's revealed, oh, they've made this mistake. And so it's not necessarily that there was fraud, but someone made an error. And here's what's funny about this. And I guess it's not funny. There's probably a different word for it. The the seller, if let's say this erroneous cash flow was set at 250,000, They now believe that they have a business worth $500,000 or $600,000. In their mind, that they have this wealth. Then you come and you show them the error, and you say, "See, the business isn't worth 500,000 to 600,000; it's worth 300,000 to 350,000." In the seller's mind, they've already got an allocation of that $600,000. They already know what they want to do with it. And now, even though that money never existed, they don't want to hear that they only have 350,000. They actually have to go through a mourning process to mourn the loss of this money, because they really thought it was real. They thought that it was theirs and they had the money to spend. And now that they've been shown that it was incorrect, they have to get over it, and it can take time.
Yep.
Sometimes it can take a year. They often don't want to believe it. Another thing that often happens in these scenarios is that when they realize the business is actually not worth as much as they thought, maybe the 350,000 isn't enough for whatever it is they wanted to do after. So maybe the only reason they listed it for sale was because the broker told them they could get 500,000 to 600,000. And so now that they realize it's not worth as much, now they don't want to sell. So I often see sellers in that scenario retreat from the deal.
Yep. Okay.
And just retreat from the market. I mean, like they leave the market.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. You might as well stay a few more years and make the money up anyway. So
Precisely. Yeah.
I have found I'm on a very famous website, one of the biggest websites for selling businesses. And I would love to see what your opinion is on, I'm going to go through some different businesses, and I'd love to know what you think about them. So this is the first one, Stretching Course Business Online, minimal time and no inventory. And the asking price is $5,999, so almost 600,000. Yep. Cash flow is 220,000. Gross revenue 220,000. Inventory 10,000. EBITDA 200,000. And established in 2019. And you can read through the description as well if you'd like.
Yeah. So does it say it's a franchise or something?
I don't believe so. It looks like just a course. It's a course business. So I would imagine it's
Stretching Course Business Online, minimal time and no inventory. So my big question would be, if you've got such an amazing cash flowing machine that doesn't take any of your time, why would you sell it? Right?
Yeah.
And so and there was a huge run up in these online businesses that occurred over the last few years, as people realized that they could make money online with these small businesses. Mm-hmm. In my mind, this is like, you're buying a business because you want the cash flow. So what is the likelihood of this cash flow continuing under my stewardship? So this is only of interest, I think, to someone who really has a good understanding of this online education space. And you would really have to look at what the competition's doing. You'd have to look at who has bought this course, what the price point is. Someone who might be interested in this business could be someone who has something else to sell to the same people, potentially. I think it's rich. Like $600,000 for a business with a cash flow of 220. And I think the EBITDA was listed at 200. So if you scroll back up just a little bit there, gross revenue is 220, EBITDA is 200. Okay, so it's a publishing business. It's an online course business.
Why does it say, so it says financial performance, and down here, if you see my mouse, it says 2024 gross revenue 318,000, net revenue 320,000, EBITDA 160,000. So why is it saying gross revenue 220, whereas in 24 it says 318?
The headlines are basically whatever marketing people want to put up there. Okay. So some people might put the best year, some people might put the most recent year, some people might average a couple of years of performance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if it's this online course business, why do you think the gross revenue is 318 and the EBITDA is 160? Where's the gross revenue going, do you think?
Well, it would go to some kind of expenses.
Yeah.
And so is it listed by a broker?
I mean, it's on a, I'm not sure. How do I tell that?
There would be some kind of contact information, like
Okay.
it might say at the bottom if there's a brokerage advertising it for sale or not.
Doesn't look like it.
Yeah.
So he's just selling it by himself.
Yeah.
Okay.
So basically he's looking to, take the next 3 years of income and sort of collect it all up front.
Mm-hmm.
There's an email list there. I think it said of 35,000 people. Eh?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then, just customer list, I guess, probably email list. YouTube channel, 15,800 followers. Facebook, 8,200. Instagram, 2,550. And Twitter, 340.
Yeah. So if I were going to buy this business, let's say that I was someone who was already in the fitness space, or I was like, I don't know, some kind of trainer for physical conditioning, and I wanted to be in the online space.
Mm-hmm.
Then this might represent an opportunity. The kind of deal that I would be willing to make for this kind of business would be something like some sort of minimal down payment, like 50 grand or 80 grand down. And then whatever balance was outstanding, I would want that balance to be paid somehow related to the sale of courses.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this thing is a gold mine. Like, what this person is telling us is that they put minimal time in and they create all this cash flow. So I would really want to know what the motivation is. If the person is appearing on YouTube twice a week with fitness videos and they have been given a terminal diagnosis of something like that, to me would indicate a real motivation on the part of the seller.
Yeah.
But if it's simply somebody who wants to sell, then I would really want to investigate this industry. I personally am not an expert in this space. And if the buyer was not an expert, that would make me really afraid for them. Because if somebody has a business like this and they're fearful or they see some kind of change coming, that's when they want to sell typically, if they don't have one of those personal motivations.
Yep. So how big of an issue do you think it is that the website is essentially run by, it seems like, I'm assuming, one person? The YouTube channel, the Facebook, it's probably one main person, and there's going to be a bit of a transition period from one host to the other. And what if you're not charismatic enough? What if they don't like you? What if they're just used to the first guy? I mean, is that going to be, have you seen it work out where, I mean, we know, I guess you did give the Burt's Bees example before, but is it really a good idea to buy somebody else's essentially probably personal brand?
Well, it's really hard to transfer that, and that's why I said minimal down payment and the balance paid out of the performance of the business.
Yeah.
Because if people don't like the new person and the sales stop, then the whole business is dead.
Yeah.
And no one expected to go to their local pharmacy and find Birch, right?
Yeah.
So and that's the difference with this business. Probably the owner of this business is active in social media. To your point, they're like an influencer or what have you. I would want to have some sort of long-term transition. Like,
yep.
I would want the seller to be appearing with me in social media content, maybe for like, regularly for several months, and then maybe occasionally going off even beyond a year potentially.
Yep, absolutely. And then this one, he says at the very bottom, he says, this business can double overnight with the correct Google and Facebook ads. Would you trust that suggestion?
So this is what's called blue sky. So blue sky is trying to sell a business for extra money under the promise of some incredible conditions or opportunity that doesn't exist, but potentially could. The problem with blue sky is that the risk and the work is on the basically has to be done by the buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And so my attitude is that as a buyer, if you have to take the risk and you have to do the work, you should get the reward.
Mm-hmm. How much do you think this guy is taking home? So EBITDA isn't just take home profit. How much do you think this guy is getting paid? Would you guess?
Well, it's an online course, so his overhead's probably pretty minimal.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but what this is probably just an individual who started doing fitness stuff online and determined that the easiest way to monetize that was through selling a course, an online course.
Mm-hmm.
But there's not a lot here, and that's the whole point of these advertisements, is that it's confidential. We don't know who this is. We don't know specifically what they're doing. If you were someone that was interested in fitness, or maybe you were potentially doing something online with health and fitness, then this might interest you. And what you would do is you would inquire,
Mm-hmm.
and you'd be asked to sign an NDA likely, and then given a package. Now, if there's no broker, what the seller has prepared could be, very comprehensive or very lacking.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know, but this would be the entryway into this journey. I always tell people, take all the numbers with a grain of salt. The real important thing is probably just the top line revenue and the description of what the business is. So if you know that you're looking for a restaurant, for example, you find an ad for a restaurant, and if they're claiming the sales are somewhere close to the size of restaurant you think you want, then you go take a look.
Yep.
I don't trust most business owners to come up with like the EBITDA or discretionary cash flow and all that kind of stuff, because they'll often make errors.
Yeah.
They'll be doing it just based on something they maybe watched online or something.
Cool. Okay. So the second one, in the beginning, you said you wanted to mostly do smaller businesses, but I saw this one online, and I'd really like to have your opinion on it because I thought it was
Sure.
pretty cool. So this one's based in Sydney. It's a dental supply business.
Okay.
And it has 2 million average, 2 million average profits, average 2 million, and average sales 9 million. And he's selling it for 7,160,000 plus stock.
Yep. And so he's looking for 3.5 times cash flow plus his inventories. So the big question then is, how much is the inventory? And
well, I think it's quite a lot because he's got over 4,000 items, and he's got 5,000 clients across Australia. So I would say it's non-negligible. And then I asked someone about it, and dental chairs, for instance, can go for like $30,000. So you can get quite a bit of inventory in there, I would say.
Right. So remember before when I was talking about the working capital, and if you buy a business and pay a seller, and then you have to put more money into your own entity in order to make it work, you've effectively paid more for the cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
So the same issue arises in businesses that have a lot of inventory. Inventory is part of working capital. And so what he's wanting is he's wanting you to pay him for the cash flow and ignore any need for a rate of return on money that you invest in inventory, which is not realistic, right? Because if there is a couple $1 million of inventory here, then effectively he's asking for 4.5, 5 times cash flow for this business. I see this frequently, and one of the questions that would have to be asked is what exactly the nature of the inventory is. So I'll give you an example. A lumber yard. Lumber yard has lumber, cinder blocks, bags of cement, things that don't spoil and are commodities. So if a lumber yard goes bankrupt, any other lumber yard will take their inventory and sell it because it's all just the same stuff everywhere. Okay. So that's what we call a fungible inventory. It's commodity, it's similar, and so banks are more likely to finance a fungible inventory. A non-fungible inventory would be something like ladies' dresses in a dress shop. So you've got different sizes, and the most popular sizes are going to sell first and become absent from the inventory. And you've also got the seasonality. The summer dresses aren't worth as much when we get to fall. And so that kind of inventory, you'd be hard pressed to find a lender to lend on that. So if the inventory is fungible, then part of the calculation of what this investment might be is going to be modified by the fact that the bank will provide some of that capital at a reasonable cost. And so that's why you'd want to know what the inventory is. So things like dentist chairs that have serial numbers, things like that are often financed through what we call floor plans. So if you think of appliance dealers or auto dealers, they'll have special financing facilities for their inventory because they're talking about large items that are serial numbered and can be traced. And so if there are dental chairs here, they probably fall into that category. And there could be some opportunity for some kind of floor plan. If it is a warehouse full of little doodads, that sell for a couple dollars each, um, it would be hard to find a lender who would be willing to take that inventory as security. And so um, this business is probably going to be of most interest to somebody who is somehow in this industry already or related to it. So someone who is in this industry, for example, in another country that wanted to enter the Australian market or something like that, or someone else who maybe sells medical supplies to doctors' offices might think that this would be a natural way for them to grow serving dentists. At that size, you're going to have pretty sophisticated buyers come along who are not, going to make a dumb move, basically. So, yeah, it. I don't know what we don't. I guess here's my answer: is we don't know what the asking price is because we don't know how much stock there is. So it's hard to tell if it makes sense or not.
Oh, okay. So he's saying, oh, so that means he's. I thought it was 7 million, and the stock was included. I see. Okay. So
Yeah,
you're
so
saying
he's
you have to
saving
buy
7
the
million
stock as
plus stock.
well. Got
Yeah,
it. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
You have no
and then you
idea.
get into then you get into all the question of, is the stock stale?
Yeah.
Are there items there that need to be written off? Are there old things that really shouldn't be valued at anything?
Yeah. Are
Right.
there things that he might have bought that nobody wants to buy from him?
Right.
Like he made a mistake and he bought something that he thought would do well and it doesn't.
So all of this has to be investigated. Back when I was married, my wife and I, we bought a trophy shop. And I don't know if you've seen in the 1970s, they had these tall trophies with these like funky colored piping bits that would go
Oh
up and
yeah.
down.
Yeah.
And in the back of the trophy shop, there were like barrels of this old stuff. And the lady that sold us the shop was like, that stuff's from the 1970s. I keep it there just in case someone comes in and they want me to modify or adjust something. Sometimes, like community groups would go buy some old bowling trophies at a yard sale for 50 cents each and then bring them in and want new engraved plates for for the three-legged race at the summer fair or something like that. Right. So
Yeah.
she kept some of the stuff. She gave it to us for free. She just said, I've left that off the inventory. It's not worth anything. And so when we did that deal, we employed a particular kind of strategy called a deferred down payment. So we gave her a down payment and she held two different seller notes. One of them was equal payments monthly over 3 years. But the second one was a special note due in 6 months for $5,000. And the strategy was we were going to sell down the inventory and operate the business with a lower inventory level than she was doing. So we effectively were going to try to take some of the inventory that she had that we got in the sale and convert that into part of the price we paid her or some of the cash that we paid her for the transaction. And what amazingly happened is some guys came in from one of these paintball fields where they shoot, they shoot the air powered little pellets at each other that splat. And they were organizing a tournament, and they wanted to advertise a trophy on their Facebook page to get people to travel from all over to go in this tournament. And they said, we want the craziest, most audacious, wonderful trophy that people are going to want.
Cool.
So what she did is she went to a hardware store and bought a double-headed axe, and
Wow.
you used it in conjunction with some of this old piping from the 1970s trophies and some old parts. And she made this trophy that she sold in like $500 or something, and it worked. They sold out their tournament. People came from all over. Everyone gawked over the trophy. The thing was 4.5 feet tall. Um, People just thought it was the greatest thing. And then other people came to her because they wanted the same kind of outrageous thing. She managed to sell off a lot of that old junk that we got for free and raise the money for the deferred down payment.
Amazing.
That it's a great story. I love to tell it, but uh, here we have no idea what the inventory is, and so obviously the person who's going to make an inquiry here, this seller is going to want to know that the buyer is a kind of person with the means to do a multi-million-dollar transaction.
Mhm.
Yeah, but ultimately we don't know because we don't know how much stock is there.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah.
Next one is an established Amazon tool dropshipping business, fully automated. Asking price $350, cash flow $129, gross revenue $711, EBITDA NA, inventory NA, which I don't fully understand why there's no inventory. And
Yeah, so it's just that the seller hasn't filled it in,
oh, okay, I see.
or doesn't understand why it would be important or applicable. So drop shipping, this is a tough business. The last couple of years, there were a couple of big sort of private equity and publicly funded, like publicly traded companies that went into this Amazon space and bought up a whole bunch of these things. What I know about the Amazon FBA business is that in order for it to be a real business, you have to have some kind of process in place for adding items. So you need to be innovating or sourcing or adding new products to your line, because products go through a life cycle. There's, early adopters, and there's wider uptake, and then it becomes more mature. And the thing with Amazon is that if you bring an innovative new product in, Amazon sees all your data. And if they think that you're making a lot of money with that tool, they'll just go get the same thing made and they'll put it in under the Amazon Basics brand and they'll compete
Yep.
with you. Right. So the business has to have a process for continuously adding new products. Otherwise, all you're doing is buying SKUs. You're just buying products and you're riding out the balance of that product life cycle that might remain. But again, we don't know what the inventory is. So if this person is almost out of stock, what happens with a lot of these businesses is you have to make a certain size order from the factory, often in China. Like maybe you have to buy a container load. And
Yep.
so you put up a large amount of money and then you sell down that container load over time. And then you have to put up the money again for your inventory. And I've seen many people try to sell these kinds of businesses, and the issue is that they're running out of inventory and they don't want to put up the investment to resupply themselves.
Yep. Okay, here's my question. How is he if he doesn't know his inventory, doesn't that affect his taxes?
Oh, he may know his inventory. He probably does.
Okay.
He just didn't put it in there.
He just didn't put in there. I see. Okay.
Yeah. So and here's the thing to remember for everyone who's looking at these websites. You just can't have a lot of confidence in them, in the
Yeah.
information, right? Because if it is filled in by a business owner, they may not understand some of the terminology. They may calculate things erroneously. Even business brokers make mistakes and calculate things incorrectly. All that you would be paying attention to here are three basic facts. It's Amazon FBA. It has to do with tools, and the sales are around 700,000 a year. And
Mm-hmm.
if those kind of fit within the box of what you're looking for as far as a business, then you would inquire
Yep.
and you would sign their NDA, and then you would get deeper into it and you would really look at what it was. So if it was some kind of highly specialized tool that is offered by very few people that has good margins and things like that, then it might be appealing to someone,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, you'd want to know about Amazon FBA, and you might even want to know about tools before you get into a business like this.
Yep. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Now, if the cash flow is $129,000, and if that is SDE,
Mm-hmm.
um, they're looking for 3 times SDE, which in my mind is pricey.
So the
Like,
word cash flow is just a little bit fluid. It can kind of mean multiple things, sounds like.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and the reason why the website probably puts the term cash flow
Mm-hmm.
is because it could relate to a lot of different things. It could be true free cash flow. It could be EBIT, EBITDA, SDE. We don't know.
Yep. Okay. It's don't trust anything you read on the internet is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I'll maybe we'll do one more.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, this is fun. I like this. All right. Prime multi-unit swim school franchise opportunity in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah. So this isn't a
So,
business.
oh, why not?
Sorry, they do have gross revenue. Sorry, I sometimes there are franchise companies that advertise on these websites
Mm-hmm.
for locations that are in fact not yet open. I didn't notice that there is a
Oh, I
gross
see.
revenue. Okay.
Yep. Because it
So
said
they're
cash flow
asking,
NA, so it looks a little bit sus. Okay, yeah.
yeah. So it's been around since 2013. They do $1 million in revenue, and they have an EBITDA of $300,000,
Mm-hmm.
and they are asking 356. So um, it seems like a screaming deal.
Yeah. My parents always said if it seems too good to be true, it probably is.
Well, I what does it say in the description here? Um, so they go to existing swimming pools like community centers, I'm guessing. Um, they don't have to lease their own space. Low overhead. Okay. So it's a service business with ultimately not a whole lot of barrier to entry because they're using public school or public swimming pools, right? So it's basically that they step up and they sign a rental agreement for an hourly rate, probably to use the pools, and they do their lessons. Um, if the EBITDA is in fact $314,000, then it seems like a good opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I would if I were in Little Rock and I was interested in businesses that probably appeal to families and things like that, I would definitely look into it.
Yep. Amazing. And it seems like a good idea, especially you can probably set up a little business ecosystem as well. For instance, I mean, you said appealing to families. It seems like you could market other things to families while you're there. Um, even swim clothes, goggles, things like that, or other like, I mean, you could partner up with like school camps, things like that. It seems like there are a lot of ways to make an ecosystem out of this and make more money.
So one of my first questions would be is what value does the franchisor provide? What do you get from the franchisor, and what does that cost you?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the alternative to buying this business would be to, offer swimming lessons,
Yep.
right?
True.
And so think about that. A person who's qualified as a swimming instructor could just say, I'm offering swimming classes, and they start advertising on Facebook or whatever, and they could develop a class and bring people in. So what is it that the franchise delivers?
And it's probably
And
not that hard to find staff who can swim and work with children. It's a pretty low bar.
yeah, well, and you know, like where I live, swimming classes are offered by municipalities as part of like their summer recreation programs and stuff like that. Like, I don't know that I've seen a private swimming school that I can ever remember. I've seen plenty of advertisements, posted on bulletin boards for people offering private lessons, like, or, learn as an adult with a one-on-one coach, that kind of thing. But this seems to be, if they're doing $1 million in revenue, it seems to be pretty well organized. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely look into it and want to learn more if I was there and interested in this kind of business.
Amazing. All right, I think we'll finish there. I'll let you go, David. Thank you so much for coming on.
No problem. I had a great time. It
I
was good
did too.
talking to you and getting into this stuff in depth. Um, yeah, I always enjoy going on a podcast.
Yeah, you're great. Where can people find you?
So all my stuff is centered around davidcbarnett.com. That's my blog site. And, if you're interested at all in buying, selling, financing, and managing small and medium-sized businesses, find me on YouTube or any of the podcast apps. Just look up David Barnett Small Business and you'll find me. I've been making videos and content for 9 years now. I think it was over 700 videos. And, enjoy it. And if you want to go deeper, I've got different online training as well as consulting services and a coaching program to help people who want to learn how to buy. And I work with people that want to sell as well. So anything to do with this space of buying and selling small businesses, that's where I can be found.
Yeah, if you're gonna buy a business, just talk to David. I don't see why you wouldn't. I mean, I'm sure the money is worth it.
Yeah, I position our services like insurance, because if you're going to go now, in this case here, if you're going to spend $356,000 buying a business, it might be worth a few $100 or $1,000 for some consulting services to have someone else look it over and just see if they don't find a problem. Um, and sometimes we find that, I mentioned earlier about the error about the dividends and double counting them. We work with people all the time where we get a few hours into a file and we find errors like that. And, the person could have gotten into that due diligence process and spent money with accountants and lawyers and really got a lot deeper before they found that problem. So just because we look at these every week, we look at 2 or 3 new files every week. We've got such a volume of stuff we're looking at that we kind of see the same things over and over. So we look for them. We look for them quickly.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. It's just pattern recognition at that point, I'm sure. All right, and yeah, you have some great books out there. You've got.
I do, yeah.
How many books do you have now?
There's 8 on Amazon, and again, all about buying and selling businesses. I got one on franchises called Franchise Warnings. The new book is called Buying versus Starting a Small Business. It's got an orange and white cover. That one just
And
came
it's
out in
cheap.
September.
It's cheap on Audible. It's like a few bucks. It's an easy read. Highly recommend.
Yeah, I I want it to be accessible. I I've had too many people cross my path who have done bad deals where they've lost money that took them a long time to accumulate, and that will impact them for years to come. And if I can help people avoid a bad deal just by sharing stuff I know, uh, it's my job to do that. And so I will. And if I can help someone through a book or a video avoid a bad deal, that's great. And if I can help them avoid a bad deal a few times with things they've learned from me, then when they find the deal that really looks good, but they're uncertain, then they'll come back and work with me, and I'll do the deep dive, and that'll cost more, obviously. But it's just about building a business. It's about demonstrating value and showing people where they can go if they're looking for help with these things.
Yeah, you're doing a good thing, David. You're building stronger American businesses. It's you're doing good deeds for the world. So thank you.
Yeah, well, not just American, businesses everywhere.
Everywhere,
We work with people all over. Yeah,
all English-speaking countries, right?
Yeah, I learned a word a couple of years ago, the Anglosphere. We work across the Anglosphere. Yeah.
Do you work in Singapore?
We have consulted with people in Singapore before. Um, Anyone who is in a country that has sort of a British legal tradition, um, I don't have a problem having a conversation with those people, because there's certain basic things in the way the economy and the way the government is set up is going to be in all of these countries with different names, but the same sorts of things are going to be there. There's going to be some place where debts are registered, for example, otherwise banks wouldn't loan money. And then when I get into other countries that have very, very different kinds of systems, I'll talk about the negotiation. I'll talk about, presenting things to sellers and things of that nature, and just kind of, let people know where I probably am not as qualified to give an opinion, where they really need to seek local help, you know, based on the way the other countries are organized.
Mm, fantastic. You're very thorough. It's pretty obvious from everything you do. All right. I hope to speak to you soon. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Serene. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.